The door creaked open, and my heart stopped. I was tangled in Eli's arms, our breaths heavy, the world reduced to the heat of his skin against mine until Sammy's small gasp sliced through the moment. My little brother, all of 12, stood frozen in the doorway, his baseball glove dangling from his hand, eyes wide as saucers. I should have jumped back, stammered an excuse, or at least pretended to be ashamed. But as Eli's hand tightened around mine, grounding me in that split second, I realized I couldn't lie not to Sammy, not to myself. This was who I was, and for the first time in my 22 years, I wasn't running from it. My name is Caleb Morrow, and I grew up in a sleepy Ohio town where the biggest scandals involved who stole Mrs. Henderson's prize roses. Our house was a modest two-story with peeling paint and a creaky porch, the kind of place where secrets were supposed to stay buried under family dinners and forced smiles. I'd spent years perfecting the art of hiding my thoughts, my feelings, the way my pulse raced when Eli Harper grinned at me across the diner counter. Eli, with his sharp jawline and quiet intensity, had been my best friend since we were kids stealing firecrackers from Old Man Jenkins' shed. But somewhere between late-night talks and stolen glances, he became something more, something I was terrified to name. That night, though, there was no hiding. Sammy's intrusion wasn't just a moment, it was a collision. A reckoning. My little brother, with his messy brown hair and endless questions, had walked into the truth I'd been dodging my whole life. And as his eyes darted between me and Eli, I knew nothing would ever be the same. Caleb. Sammy's voice was small, trembling, like he was piecing together a puzzle he wasn't ready for. What's going on? Eli shifted beside me, his warmth pulling me back from the edge of panic. I could have lied, said it was a joke, a misunderstanding, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I met Sammy's gaze, my heart pounding so loud I thought it might drown out the world. Sammy, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. This is who I am. The silence that followed was deafening. Sammy's face crumpled, not with disgust, but with confusion, like he was trying to reconcile the brother he idolized with the stranger standing before him. Eli squeezed my hand, a silent promise that he wasn't going anywhere, and I clung to that anchor as Sammy turned and bolted down the hall, his footsteps echoing like a storm. I should have chased him, but my feet were glued to the floor. Eli's voice broke through, soft but firm. He'll be okay, Caleb. He just needs time. But time was the one thing I'd always been afraid of, time to face myself, time to face my family, time to face a town that whispered faggot like it was a curse. Growing up, I'd heard the stories. The kid who got beaten behind the gas station for holding hands with another boy. The pastor's sermons about sin. My dad's offhand remarks about those people. I'd built walls around my heart, brick by brick, until Eli started tearing them down. We'd been careful, or so I thought. Stolen moments in his beat-up Chevy. Quiet walks by the creek where no one could see. But Sammy's wide eyes told me our secret wasn't ours anymore. And as I stood there, staring at the empty doorway, I realized I didn't want it to be a secret, not anymore. The next morning, the house was too quiet. Mom was at the hospital for her night shift, and Dad was probably nursing a hangover in his recliner. Sammy hadn't come out of his room since last night, and the guilt gnawed at me like a bad tooth. I knocked on his door, my knuckles hesitant. Sammy, can we talk? No answer. I pressed my forehead against the door, the wood cool against my skin. I'm sorry you saw that. I started, then stopped. No, I wasn't sorry for loving Eli. I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. I was scared. The door cracked open, and Sammy's tear-streaked face appeared. Why didn't you tell me? He whispered. I'm your brother. His words hit harder than any punch. I knelt down. I level with him. I didn't want you to look at me differently. I admitted. But I'm still me. Sammy. I'm still the guy who helps with your math homework and sneaks you extra ice cream. He didn't say anything, just hugged his knees and stared at the floor. I wanted to pull him into a hug, but I didn't know if he'd let me. Instead, I sat beside him, the silence heavy but not empty. It was the start of something, maybe understanding, maybe forgiveness. I didn't know yet, but I knew I couldn't go back to pretending. Eli was waiting for me outside, leaning against his truck, the morning sun glinting off his blonde hair. How'd it go? He asked, his voice low, like he was bracing for bad news. He's hurt, I said, running a hand through my hair. But he's listening. That's something, right? Eli nodded, his eyes softening. It's everything, Caleb. You're not alone in this. And for the first time, I believed him. But as we drove into town, the weight of what was coming settled over me. Sammy wasn't the only one who'd find out. In a place like this, secrets spread faster than wildfire, and I wasn't sure I was ready for the flames. By noon, the diner was buzzing with the usual crowd: truckers, retirees, and high school kids cutting class. Eli and I slid into our usual booth, the one by the window with a view of Main Street's faded storefronts. The smell of greasy fries and burnt coffee filled the air, but all I could focus on was the knot in my stomach. Sammy's face kept flashing in my mind, his confusion a mirror of my own fears. You okay? Eli asked, his knee brushing mine under the table. It was a small gesture, but it sent a jolt through me, a reminder of what we were risking. I don't know, I admitted, stirring my coffee until it was a muddy whirlpool. What if he tells someone? What if this gets out? Eli's hand twitched, like he wanted to reach for me but thought better of it. Then we deal with it, he said, his voice steady. Together. I wanted to believe him, but this town wasn't kind to people like us. Last year, a kid named Tyler got kicked out of his house for coming out. He ended up sleeping in his car until he could scrape together enough for a bus ticket to Columbus. I didn't want that to be me or worse. Eli. The bell above the diner door jingled, and my heart sank. Jake Peterson, my dad's old high school buddy, walked in, his boots thumping against the linoleum. Jake was the kind of guy who thought tolerance was a dirty word, and his eyes narrowed when he saw me and Eli sitting so close. I pulled my knee away from Eli's, my pulse racing. Caleb Morrow, Jake drawled, stopping by our booth. Didn't expect to see you here with company. His gaze lingered on Eli, heavy with suspicion. Just grabbing lunch, I said, forcing a smile. You know Eli? Jake grunted, his eyes flicking between us. Yeah. I know him. He lingered a moment longer before heading to the counter, but I could feel his stare burning into my back. Eli leaned in, his voice barely a whisper. He doesn't know anything. Don't let him get in your head. But Jake wasn't the only one watching. The diner felt like a stage, every glance a spotlight. I could almost hear the whispers starting, the kind that would follow us to the grocery store, the gas station, the church we hadn't attended in years. I pushed my plate away, my appetite gone. That night, I found Sammy in the backyard, tossing a baseball against the garage. The thwack of the ball echoed in the quiet, each hit sharper than the last. I grabbed my glove and joined him, catching his throws in silence. You're not mad at me, are you? I finally asked, tossing the ball back. Sammy caught it, his face scrunched up. I don't get it, he said. You and Eli, you're like, together. Like mom and dad. I hesitated, the weight of his question pressing down on me. Yeah, I said softly. Something like that. He didn't look at me, just threw the ball harder. Does that mean you're gay? The word hung in the air, sharp and unfamiliar. I nodded, my throat tight. Yeah, Sammy. I am. He didn't say anything for a long time, just kept throwing. Finally, he stopped, his glove dangling at his side. Is that why you never told me? Because you thought I'd hate you. I knelt down, my heart aching. I was scared you wouldn't understand. But I should have trusted you. You're my brother. Sammy's eyes were wet, but he didn't cry. I don't hate you, he mumbled. I don't know what to do now. You don't have to do anything, I said. Just keep being you. He nodded, and for the first time since last night, I saw a flicker of the old Sammy, the one who trusted me with everything. But as we headed inside, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the calm before the storm. The next day, Eli and I decided to get out of town for a bit, driving to the lake where we used to fish as kids. The water was still, reflecting the gray sky, and for a while, we just sat on the dock, our shoulders brushing. It felt like a stolen moment, a bubble where the world couldn't touch us. I love you, Eli said suddenly, his voice quiet but sure. It wasn't the first time he'd said it, but it hit me like a freight train every time. I love you too, I said, my voice cracking. But I'm scared. Eli, what if this ruins everything? He turned to me, his blue eyes fierce. Then we build something new. Whatever happens, I'm not letting you go. I wanted to believe him, but as we drove back to town, I saw Jake Peterson's truck parked outside the diner, and my stomach twisted. Something told me the whispers were already spreading, and I wasn't sure we were ready for what came next. The whispers hit us by Monday. I felt it the moment I walked into the hardware store where I worked part-time. Old Mr. Grayson, who usually greeted me with a nod, barely looked up from his newspaper. Two guys from my high school football team lingered by the paint aisle, their hushed voices cutting off when I passed. I caught the word Moro and felt the air shift, like a storm rolling in. Eli texted me during my break, "Meet me at the creek after your shift. We need to talk." His words were calm, but I could sense the urgency behind them. I spent the rest of the day stocking shelves, my hands shaky, my mind racing. By the time I got to the creek, the sun was dipping low, painting the water gold. Eli was already there, sitting on a flat rock, skipping stones across the surface. His face was tight, not with anger, but with resolve. "Jake's been talking," he said, not looking at me. I overheard him at the gas station. He saw us at the diner, and now he's telling anyone who'll listen. My stomach dropped. What's he saying? Eli's jaw clenched. That we're together. That we're disgusting. His words, not mine. I sat beside him, the rock cold against my jeans. Did he say anything about Sammy? Not yet, Eli said. But it's only a matter of time. This town's too small for secrets. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to run. Instead, I grabbed a stone and hurled it into the creek, watching it sink. What do we do, Eli? I can't lose Sammy. Or my family. He turned to me, his hand finding mine. We don't hide. That's what they want, for us to be ashamed, to disappear. But I'm done hiding. Caleb. Aren't you? His words hit me like a punch. I'd spent so long hiding, pretending to date girls, laughing at my dad's crude jokes, avoiding Eli's gaze in public, that I didn't know how to stop. But looking into his eyes, I saw something stronger than fear, defiance. Love. And I wanted that more than I wanted safety. That night, I went home to find Mom in the kitchen, chopping carrots with a ferocity that told me she'd heard something. She didn't look at me as I sat at the table, just kept chopping. "Mrs. Larson called," she said finally, her voice tight. "Said she saw you and Eli at the diner. Said you were close." I swallowed hard. "Mom, I don't." She cut me off, her knife pausing midair. "I don't want to hear it. Caleb. Not now." Her words stung, but I saw the tremble in her hands, the way her eyes avoided mine. She wasn't angry, she was scared. Scared of what this meant for me, for our family, for the life she'd imagined for us. I wanted to tell her I was still her son, that nothing had changed, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I stood and left, the screen door slamming behind me. Sammy was in his room, playing video games, but he paused when I walked in. "Mom's mad," he said quietly. "Is it because of you and Eli?" I sat on the edge of his bed, my hands clasped tight. "Yeah," I said. "She's just trying to understand." He frowned, his controller forgotten. "Why's everyone so mad about it? You're not hurting anybody." His innocence broke something in me. I pulled him into a hug, his small frame stiff at first, then softening. "Some people don't get it," I said. "But you do, don't you?" He nodded against my shoulder. "You're my brother. I don't care who you love." I held him tighter, tears burning my eyes. Sammy was my lifeline, the one thing keeping me grounded as the world started to unravel. The next day, Eli and I decided to face the storm head-on. We went to the diner again, sitting in the same booth, our knees touching under the table. Let them stare, I thought. Let them talk. But when Jake walked in with two of his buddies, their eyes locking onto us, I felt the air thicken. Jake leaned against the counter, his voice loud enough for the whole diner to hear. "Didn't think you'd show your face here. Moro." Eli's hand tensed on his coffee mug, but I spoke first. "Got a problem, Jake?" He smirked, crossing his arms. "Just wondering how your dad's gonna feel when he hears about this." The diner went quiet, every eye on us. I stood, my chair scraping the floor. "He'll hear it from me," I said, my voice shaking but clear. "And I'm not ashamed." Eli stood beside me, his shoulder brushing mine. For a moment, we were untouchable. But as we left, the weight of what I'd just done settled over me. I'd drawn a line in the sand, and there was no going back. Telling Dad was like walking into a lion's den with a paper shield. He was in the garage when I got home, tinkering with his old Mustang, the radio blaring classic rock. The air smelled of oil and beer, and his shoulders stiffened when I walked in. "Heard you caused a scene at the diner," he said without looking up. I leaned against the workbench, my hands shoved in my pockets. Jake was running his mouth. I shut him up. Dad snorted, wiping his hands on a rag. "Jake's an idiot, but he's not wrong about everything." He finally looked at me, his eyes hard. "You and Eli. That true?" My heart pounded, but I held his gaze. "Yeah, it's true." He threw the rag down, his face darkening. "Jesus, Caleb. You know what this town's like. You know what they'll do to you." "I know," I said, my voice steady despite the fear clawing at me. "But I'm done pretending." He stared at me, his jaw working like he was chewing on words he couldn't spit out. "Your mother's a wreck," he said finally. "And Sammy, what's he supposed to think?" "Sammy's fine," I snapped. "He's the only one who's not treating me like I'm broken." Dad shook his head, turning back to the car. "You're making a mistake, son." This ain't gonna end well. His words followed me as I left the garage, each one a weight on my shoulders. I found Eli waiting in his truck, his face pale. "How'd it go?" he asked. "About as well as I expected," I said, climbing in. "He thinks I'm throwing my life away." Eli reached for my hand, his fingers warm against mine. "You're not. You're finally living it." We drove to the edge of town, where the fields stretched out under a starlit sky. For a while, we just sat there, the silence between us comfortable but heavy. I thought about Sammy, about Mom's trembling hands, about Dad's disappointment. I thought about Jake in the diner and the whispers that were probably spreading to every corner of this town. But mostly, I thought about Eli, how his laugh could pull me out of the darkest places, how his touch made me feel like I was enough. "I'm scared," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "But I'm not sorry." Eli turned to me, his eyes shining in the dark. "Good. Because I'm not either." The next morning, I woke to find Sammy sitting on my bed, his face serious. "I told my friends about you and Eli," he said, his voice small but firm. My heart stopped. "What?" "I told them you're together," he said, "and that it's okay. But some of them laughed. Said mean stuff." I sat up, pulling him into a hug. "I'm sorry you had to hear that," I said. "But thank you for sticking up for me." He hugged me back, fierce and quick. "You're my brother," he said, like it was the simplest truth in the world. But the world wasn't simple. At work, the whispers turned into stares, then into words. A customer I'd known for years refused to let me ring him up, muttering something about sinners. My boss, usually gruff but fair, pulled me aside and suggested I take a few days off until things cooled down. I wanted to argue, but the exhaustion in his eyes told me he was trying to protect me. Eli wasn't faring much better. He worked at the auto shop, and one of his co-workers had scrawled a slur on his toolbox. He shrugged it off when he told me, but I saw the hurt in his eyes, the way his shoulders slumped. We were fighting a battle we hadn't chosen, and I wasn't sure we could win. That night, we went back to the creek, our safe haven. The water was dark, reflecting the moon like a broken mirror. "Maybe we should leave," I said, the words slipping out before I could stop them. "Start over somewhere else." Eli looked at me, his expression unreadable. "Is that what you want?" I didn't know. Leaving meant giving up on Sammy, on my family, on the life I'd always known. But staying meant fighting every day, facing the hate, the judgment, the fear. I took Eli's hand, feeling the calluses on his palm, the strength in his grip. "I want you," I said. "That's all I know." He kissed me then, soft and fierce, like he was pouring all his courage into me. And for a moment, the world was just us two boys in love, defiant against the odds. The next week was a blur of tension and small victories. Sammy started asking questions, careful, curious ones about what it meant to be gay, about why people cared so much. I answered as honestly as I could, and each time, I saw a little more of his fear fade away. He even started joking about it, calling Eli my boyfriend with a shy grin that made my heart swell. But the town wasn't as forgiving. The whispers turned into confrontations. One night, as Eli and I walked out of the diner, a group of guys from Jake's crew cornered us in the parking lot. Their leader, a burly guy named Mitch, stepped forward, his breath reeking of beer. "You think you can just flaunt that shit around here?" He spat. Eli stepped in front of me, his fists clenched. "Back off, Mitch." I grabbed Eli's arm, my heart racing. "Let's go," I said, pulling him toward the truck. But Mitch wasn't done. He shoved Eli hard, and before I could think, I was between them, my own fists raised. "Touch him again," I said, my voice low, "and you'll regret it." Mitch laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You're both gonna regret this," he said, backing off with his buddies trailing behind. We drove home in silence, the adrenaline fading into a dull ache. Eli reached for my hand, his thumb brushing over my knuckles. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "Yes, I did," I replied. "I'm not letting them take this from us." At home, things were no easier. Mom had started avoiding me, her silences louder than any argument. Dad spent more time in the garage, and when he did talk, it was clipped and cold. But Sammy was my rock. One night, he slipped a drawing under my Dora crayon sketch of me, Eli, and him holding hands under a rainbow. At the bottom, in his messy scrawl, he'd written, "We're still a family." I cried then, harder than I had in years. Not because of the hate or the fear, but because of Sammy's love, so pure and unwavering. I taped the drawing to my wall, a reminder of what I was fighting for. Eli and I started planning. Not to leave not yet, but to carve out a space for ourselves. We talked about moving to Columbus, where there was a community, a place where we could hold hands without looking over our shoulders. But every time I thought about leaving, I saw Sammy's face, and I knew I couldn't abandon him. One afternoon, I found Mom in the backyard, staring at the old swing set Sammy had outgrown. "I don't understand," she said, her voice breaking. "Why does it have to be so hard?" I sat beside her, the rusty chains creaking under my weight. "It's hard because people make it that way," I said. "But I love him, Mom. And I love you. I just want you to see that." She didn't say anything, but she reached for my hand, her fingers trembling. It wasn't acceptance not yet, but it was a start. That night, Eli and I went to a support group in the next town over, a small gathering in a church basement. There were others like us, couples, singles, parents, all sharing their stories. For the first time, I felt like I wasn't alone. An older man, gray-haired and kind, told us about his partner of 30 years, about the life they'd built despite the odds. "It gets better," he said, his eyes crinkling. "Not perfect, but better." I held on to those words as we drove home, Eli's hand in mine. But when we pulled into my driveway, my heart sank. Jake's truck was parked across the street, and he was leaning against it, watching us. I didn't know what he wanted, but I knew it wasn't good. "Caleb," Eli said, his voice steady. "Whatever happens, we're in this together." I nodded, my throat tight. "Together," I echoed, stepping out of the truck to face whatever came next. Jake didn't approach us that night, but his presence was a warning. The next morning, I woke to find my car's tires slashed, the word "fag" spray painted across the hood. I stood there, staring at the jagged letters, my hands shaking with rage and shame. Sammy came outside, his eyes wide. "Who did this?" he asked, his voice trembling. "I don't know," I lied, because I couldn't bear to tell him it was probably Jake or one of his buddies. I sent him inside and called Eli, who showed up with a can of paint and a grim expression. "We can't let this stop us," he said, scrubbing at the paint with a rag. "They want us to run. We won't." I nodded, but the weight of it all was crushing me. The town felt like a trap, closing in tighter every day. At work, my boss let me back in, but the customers were colder, their stares sharper. Even Mrs. Henderson, who'd always slip me extra cookies, turned away when I greeted her. Sammy, though, was a light in the dark. He started sticking closer to me, walking with me to the store, sitting with me and Eli when we hung out in the backyard. One day, he brought home a library book about LGBTQ history, its pages dog-eared and marked with sticky notes. I wanted to understand, he said, handing it to me. It's not so different from other stuff people fight for, right? I hugged him so tight he squirmed. You're too smart for your own good, I said, ruffling his hair. But the darkness kept creeping in. One night, I overheard Mom and Dad arguing in the kitchen, their voices low but heated. He's our son, Mom said, her voice breaking. We can't just push him away. He's choosing this, Dad snapped. He's choosing to make our lives harder. I wanted to barge in, to yell that I wasn't choosing anything, that this was who I was. But I stayed in the hallway, my fists clenched, listening as Mom cried and Dad stormed out. The next morning, Mom looked at me with red-rimmed eyes and said, I'm trying, Caleb. I am. It was enough for now. But the real test came at the town fair, an annual event where everyone showed up to eat cotton candy and pretend they liked each other. Eli and I went together, not hiding, but not flaunting either. We stuck to the edges, sharing a funnel cake and watching Sammy run off to the games with his friends. Then Jake showed up, drunk and loud, with Mitch and another guy in tow. They spotted us by the Ferris wheel, and Jake's voice carried over the crowd. Well, look at the lovebirds, he sneered. Ain't that sweet? People turned to stare, their faces a mix of curiosity and disgust. I grabbed Eli's hand, my heart pounding. Ignore him, I muttered. But Jake wasn't done. He stepped closer, his breath hot and sour. You think you can just live like this? In our town? Eli stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. It's our town too, Jake. For a moment, I thought Jake would swing. But then Sammy appeared, pushing through the crowd, his small frame trembling with anger. Leave my brother alone, he shouted, his voice cracking but fierce. The crowd went silent. Jake blinked, caught off guard, and for a moment, I saw something like shame flicker in his eyes. He muttered something and walked away, his buddies following. Sammy turned to me, his face flushed. I hate them, he said, his voice shaking. I hate how they treat you. I pulled him into a hug, my heart swelling with pride and pain. You're braver than I am, I said. Eli squeezed my shoulder, his eyes shining. He's got your heart, he said softly. That night, as the fair's lights faded and we walked home, I felt something shift. The town hadn't changed, but I had. And with Sammy and Eli by my side, I knew I could face whatever came next. The weeks that followed were a tightrope walk. The town didn't magically accept us, but Sammy's outburst at the fair had shifted something. A few people misses. Henderson, the librarian. Even my boss started treating me like a person again, their smiles tentative but real. Others, like Jake and his crew, kept their distance, their glares sharp but silent. Mom started talking to me more, asking small questions about Eli, about how we met, about what we wanted for the future. It wasn't easy, her voice still caught sometimes. Her eyes still darted away, but she was trying. Dad was harder, his silences heavier. But one night he joined us for dinner and didn't leave the room when Eli came over. It was a start. Sammy, though, was the real hero. He started a project at school, a presentation about acceptance, using me and Eli as his example. When he told me, I was terrified, proud, but terrified. You sure about this, kid? I asked, ruffling his hair. He nodded, his jaw set. People need to know it's okay to be different. His presentation was the talk of the school, And not all of it was good. Some parents complained, and one teacher tried to shut it down, but Sammy stood his ground. When he came home with a black eye from a kid who'd called him a fag lover, I nearly lost it. But Sammy just shrugged, wiping blood from his lip. "Worth it," he said. Eli and I started planning for real, not just dreams, but steps. We saved money, researched apartments in Columbus, looked into jobs. The idea of leaving still hurt, but it felt less like running and more like building something new. Sammy promised to visit, already planning sleepovers and video game marathons. One night, Eli and I sat on my porch, the air cool with the first hint of fall. "You ever think about what would have happened if Sammy hadn't walked in?" he asked, his voice soft. I leaned against him, my head on his shoulder. "We'd still be hiding," I said. "And I'd still be miserable." He kissed my forehead, his lips warm against my skin. "Then I'm glad he did." The next day, I found a letter from Mom on my bed, her handwriting neat but shaky. "Caleb, I'm sorry it took me so long to see you. I'm proud of who you are, and I love you. Always." Mom. I cried reading it, not out of sadness, but relief. For the first time, I felt like I could breathe, like the walls I'd built around myself were finally crumbling. But the peace didn't last. Jake and his buddies struck again, this time at Eli's auto shop. They trashed his workstation, broke his tools, left a note that read, "Leave or else." Eli didn't tell me until I saw the bruises on his knuckles, the rage in his eyes. "We can't stay," he said, his voice breaking. "Not if it's going to be like this." I wanted to argue, to fight, but I saw the exhaustion in his face, the fear he wouldn't admit. And I knew he was right. This town wasn't home anymore, not for us. We made the decision that night. We'd move to Columbus by the end of the month. I told Sammy first, bracing for his tears, but he just nodded. "You'll be happy there," he said. "But you better call me every day." I laughed, pulling him into a hug. "Every day?" I promised. Telling Mom and Dad was harder. Mom cried, but she hugged me tight, whispering, "Be safe, Caleb." Dad just nodded, his eyes distant, but he shook Eli's hand before we left, a small gesture that meant more than words. As we packed the truck, Sammy ran out with his baseball glove, tossing it to me. "For luck," he said, grinning. I caught it, my throat tight. "For luck," I echoed. Columbus was louder, brighter, messier than our little town. The apartment we found was small, with creaky floors and a view of a brick wall, but it was ours. Eli and I spent our first night unpacking, laughing as we argued over where to hang his old concert posters. It felt like freedom, like a new chapter we were writing together. Sammy visited the first weekend, his eyes wide as he took in the city. We walked through the short north, ate ice cream at Jenny's, and played catch in the park. He talked nonstop about school, his friends, the new kid who'd thanked him for his presentation. "He said he's gay too," Sammy whispered, like it was a secret. "I told him about you and Eli." I hugged him, my heart full. "You're changing the world, kid." Mom called every Sunday, her voice warmer each time. Dad sent a text once, a simple "hope you're doing okay." It wasn't much, but it was enough. The town we'd left behind didn't change overnight, but there were glimmers of hope. Mrs. Henderson sent us a care package of cookies. The librarian emailed about a new LGBTQ book club, and even my old boss offered me a reference for a job in Columbus. Eli and I found our rhythm. He got a job at a garage, and I started working at a bookstore, surrounded by stories that reminded me why we'd fought so hard. We joined a community center, met other couples, made friends who didn't flinch when we held hands. It wasn't perfect, there were still stares. Still whispers, but it was better. So much better. One night, as we sat on our tiny balcony, Eli pulled me close, his breath warm against my neck. "You ever miss it?" he asked. "The town, I mean." I thought about its creaky porch, the diner, the creek. I thought about Sammy's laugh, Mom's hugs, even Dad's gruff silences. "Sometimes," I said, "but not as much as I love this." He smiled, his eyes crinkling. "Good. Because I'm not going anywhere." A year later, Sammy came to stay for the summer. He was taller now, his voice starting to crack, but he still carried that baseball glove. We took him to a pride parade, his eyes wide as he waved a tiny rainbow flag. "This is so cool," he said, grinning. "You guys belong here." And he was right. We did. That moment, Sammy's smile, Eli's hand in mine, the crowd cheering around us was worth every fight, every tear, every fear. I'd walked through fire to get here, and I'd do it again in a heartbeat. My little brother walked in on me mid-act, and I couldn't pretend I was ashamed. Because I wasn't. I was proud of who I was, of who I loved, of the family we'd built, not just with blood, but with courage. And as I looked at Eli and Sammy, I knew we'd found our home not in a place, but in each other.